The footnote was 7 words. They were in the optional remarks box at the bottom of a relay contractor's anomaly report, a field the authority's standard form included for completeness and most contractors left blank. And Renata Solheim read them in the cold white light of a Frontier field review module alone, and did not close the file the way she was supposed to. The network maintains a timing reference not described in current documentation. Ask me officially. She had been doing oversight for 20 years. The work was not complicated. It had a direction. The Frontier cost money, the returns were thin, and the authority's job was to apply the numbers honestly. And it went in that direction, and she went with it. The authority sent her to the posts. She assessed, she filed, the posts closed, the people reassigned or relocated or departed, and the infrastructure went on the surplus manifest, and the ledger came out correct. She did not call herself the instrument of withdrawal. That was a word she had heard a junior auditor use once, and she had corrected him because the word implied a policy, and there was no policy. There was a calculation, and the calculation was not her enemy and not her friend. It was the correct answer to a specific question, and her job was to ask the question cleanly. In 20 years, she had closed 47 postings. The work showed in her record as a column of numbers. Cost removed, allocation redirected, assets returned to inventory. She read her record sometimes in the same way she read anomaly reports, looking for the pattern, waiting to see if the column said something she hadn't noticed yet. So far, it said she was competent and regular and very unlikely to surprise anyone. The current sweep was the Frontier interior, the gap between the Accord's administrative zone and the dark that the charts called a navigation exclusion and the Frontier called the hush. 12 postings. She had been at the transit hub 4 weeks. 11 of the 12 postings were finished by week 3. 11 clear closures, 1 that wasn't clear. Reach Relay Arc 9. Relay Chain Tender. Contractor name, Haddad, Y. 4 years on post. Chain certification current. Buoy status reports in order. Anomaly filings. She had paused here. Anomaly filings regular and careful. All 4 years in the optional box that most contractors left blank. The optional box was where contractors put things they could not fit in the standard report categories. Renata had read 10,000 optional boxes in 20 years, and she could categorize them in her sleep. Supply complaints, equipment grievances, requests for scheduling adjustments, the occasional coherent observation that had been filed in the wrong category and deserved a transfer to a proper record. She had learned to read the boxes quickly, take the supply complaints seriously, and close the window. She read Yara Haddad's boxes slowly. Year 1. The relay network exhibits timing behavior not described in current documentation. The network maintains an internal reference I cannot identify using issued equipment. Year 2. The timing reference described in last year's remarks is present and unchanged. I have observed it using improvised instrumentation. Current documentation does not acknowledge it. I am flagging this again because I was not asked to explain it. Ask me officially. Year 3. The timing reference I have flagged twice is consistent with what a Sewell specialist source describes as a clock structure. I believe it originates from the navigation exclusion zone. My previous reports have not been acknowledged. If this is the wrong channel, please advise the correct one. If it is the right channel, please ask. Ask me officially. Year 4. The reference is slowing. I have 3 recordings now, months apart. The interval is increasing. Ask me officially. Renata set the slate down on the console ledge. Outside the viewport, the Frontier dark was doing what the Frontier dark always did, which was nothing, which was the correct behavior for a very large empty space. The overhead light was white and impersonal and cast no shadows. She sat in it for a while. There were 4 other documents in her queue, forwarded by the algorithmic triage that ran below the review system and caught superficially related anomaly flags. The algorithm had routed them to her because she was the assigned oversight officer for the sweep and because each of them carried the same 2-word flag in its metadata: inherited infrastructure. She had almost not opened them. Her job was to close 12 postings, not to chase algorithmic cross-references from an automated system that flagged two-word matches without understanding them. The review queue was full of noise. You could not act on noise. But Yara Haddad's boxes were not noise. They were something different, and the something different feeling was making her read things she would otherwise have closed. The first document was a contact station log from a gas giant research posting in the outer reach. A single specialist posting, currently on the closure list under a different sweep, which had been the source of two anomaly flags she had auto-processed without reading. The specialist was a catalog analyst. He had been conducting routine seasonal fieldwork with a Sewell catalog system. When the Sewell instrument had produced a reading it had not been designed to produce. It had categorized something in his signal log as structured like a timekeeper. The analyst had written up the observation correctly, flagged it twice, and received an auto-reply both times, noting that format non-standard observations were logged for review. Someone in the processing chain had written, "huh," in a comment field. Nobody had followed up. The second document was a corporate salvage survey. A Verge reclamation field contractor named Mara Ting had filed a disputed recovery report flagging a cluster of frontier sites where her rig's Keep Alive handshakes had consistently failed in a specific and consistent way. Not in the ways that meant malfunction, not in the ways that meant operator error, but in the ways that suggested the sites were doing something to the incoming equipment that nobody could account for with documented mechanisms. The report had been challenged by the Verge legal team as exaggerated, the contractor's prior record questioned, and the finding contested into an arbitration queue where it had been pending for 17 months with no assigned date. The third and fourth documents were reach intelligence fragments, blank regions on the frontier maps, not regions that hadn't been surveyed. The charts marked them as surveyed with standard survey completion codes, the kind that meant a contractor had passed through and logged them and moved on. But in the intelligence archive, the same regions showed a pattern of transit that had no clean explanation. Traffic that went in at normal documented rates and came back out at rates that were not the same. Not different by much, different in a direction. And the intelligence assessment recommended further investigation. And the note at the bottom of the assessment said, "Further investigation not allocated pending cost review." Her cost review. She put all 5 documents side by side on the console display, the 4 forwarded ones in Yara Haddad's relay tender reports, and looked at them. Individually, each document was a frontier oddity. The authority received frontier oddities at a rate of several hundred a year. The standard response was correct and consistent. Insufficient evidence to support ongoing investigation. File under anomalous observation, standard category. Renata had sent back that response so many times she could have formatted it in her sleep. She was not sending it back this time. The problem was not whether the documents were related. She could see they were related. She had been reading infrastructure anomaly reports for 20 years, and what she was looking at, laid across the console display, was a thing she had not seen before. Completely different kinds of frontier reports, from completely different posting types, describing completely different specific incidents, all approaching the same kind of event from the outside. Not the same incident, the same shape of thing. Inherited infrastructure behaving in ways the documentation did not contain, in a direction that was consistent even when the surface level detail was not, observed by people who had been watching long enough to start taking notes. The problem was the threshold. Each document was too thin to survive individual escalation. She had thought about this. If she escalated the relay tender's reports alone, they were a frontier contractor's claim about undocumented behavior using improvised equipment, which was the formal description of approximately half the anomaly flags the authority received from the frontier every quarter. If she escalated the gas giant analyst's logs alone, they were a catalog observation in a format non-standard category from a single specialist posting due for closure. If she escalated the salvage survey alone, it was in arbitration and therefore not her jurisdiction to move. If she escalated the intelligence fragments alone, they had already been reviewed and deferred at the appropriate level by the appropriate authority, and there was nothing in the current review cycle that changed that assessment. She needed a way to move all of them at once, without calling them individually sufficient. She pinged the compliance desk. It was the right first step. If there was an existing mechanism, the compliance desk would know it.
Division 7 compliance, how can I assist?
I have 5 frontier reports with what I believe is a shared structural category. Individually, none of them meets escalation threshold. Is there a mechanism for aggregate treatment? A way to treat related reports as a single file rather than 5 separate insufficient filings?
For escalation, no mechanism I'm aware of. Escalation requires individual evidence sufficiency, so aggregate doesn't apply. Each report would need to meet threshold on its own.
What about Section A-19.3, the Infrastructure Anomaly Classification Rule?
A pause.
That's the Unified Inquiry Rule. That's for correlated anomalies across postings, to prevent premature closure when postings are experiencing related problems. It's technically a different mechanism than escalation. It's a classification.
Yes, thank you.
She closed the channel. The compliance officer had not known she was doing it. She had explained with the precision of someone who did not understand she was being useful exactly where the door was. Not escalation. Escalation required individual sufficiency. Classification was different. Classification under Section A-19.3 required a reviewing officer to determine that 2 or more reports described anomalous behavior of a related or correlated nature, and to assert that classification on her own professional authority. Not the reports, not the evidence, her authority, her judgment, her call. She opened the classification form. It asked her to describe the correlated anomaly in plain language. She had been thinking about this for the better part of an hour. She put the reading glasses back on and wrote, "Multiple frontier postings in the inherited infrastructure category have filed reports describing anomalous behavior of inherited reach components that is, 1, inconsistent with current documentation, 2, consistent across unrelated postings in direction if not in specific form, 3, not attributable to equipment failure, operator error, or documented environmental variation. The reports are being classified under Unified Infrastructure Anomaly Inquiry per Section A-19.3. Closure of affected postings is deferred pending inquiry conclusion." She read it back. It was dry and it was defensible, and every word of it was true by her honest professional assessment. And it was also, she understood clearly, the kind of thing that would keep 12 frontier postings alive indefinitely, while the authority was obligated by its own rules to fund an investigation it would rather not have. She was not stating she understood the pattern. She was stating that the pattern warranted investigation. The distinction was fine, and she was going to need it. The risk was real, and she had looked at it squarely, the way she looked at all the risks in her ledger. The risk was not that she was wrong. The risk was that she was right. And the right answer here was the kind of right answer that drew the attention of people who had specific reasons to prefer their frontier, postings closed, and their infrastructure anomalies filed and forgotten. She had worked for the authority long enough to know the texture of institutional resistance, the way a file could go very quiet very quickly once the right people decided it should. An inquiry she had opened in a spare room on a transit hub, on a professional judgment call nobody at the division level had endorsed, was exactly the kind of file that could go quiet. She was going to make it loud enough that going quiet was not an option. She was using Section A-19.3 in a way it was not intended to be used. The rule existed to prevent the authority from closing a cluster of postings that were experiencing the same malfunction and then losing the data needed to study that malfunction. She was using it to force the authority to fund an investigation into something she could not currently explain by asserting on her own professional authority that the things she could not explain were related. This was not breaking the rule. Breaking the rule would have been falsifying data or claiming jurisdiction she did not have, or suppressing a report that should have been filed. What she was doing was using a tool correctly in a way its designers had not anticipated. The tool gave her the authority to make the call. She was making it. She filed the classification. The confirmation came back in a standard issue acknowledgement that did not know it was confirming anything unusual. Infrastructure Anomaly Classification 774 Omega filed. Inquiry status open, related posting closures, deferred. The system had no way to understand what it had just done. She had not explained it to the system. She had not asked for the system's opinion. She set the slate down and opened her closure queue. 11 closures to file. She filed them in order with correct language because the frontier postings she was closing had nothing to do with 774 Omega, and they were going to close regardless of anything she had done today. She filed them cleanly and without sentiment and sent them before she could second-guess them. After the 11 were filed, she sat in the spare room for a while, with the overhead white light doing its reliable, uninspiring work, and the viewport showing the dark. She was, in a technical sense, done with the sweep. The numbers were clean. 11 closures, which was good, and 1 deferral under investigation, which was not good for the numbers and was the only decision she had made today that she would make again. She opened the 774 Omega working file. It needed a primary source list, a contributing record index, and a summary statement. The standard administrative housekeeping for a new inquiry file. She was good at housekeeping. She started with the source list, which was straightforward. Haddad Y, Reach Relay, ARC9, 4 reports, Anonymous Contact Station Analyst, Gas Giant Outer Reach Posting, Teng M, Verge Field Contractor, 1 Contested Survey, 2 Intelligence Fragment References, Access Restricted, cited by archive number. Then the summary statement. She had been thinking about this since she had filed the classification. She stared at the blinking cursor for almost a minute, which was a long time for her, and then she wrote the only honest summary she had. The correlated anomalies in this file describe, across 5 unrelated frontier sources, behavior in inherited reach infrastructure components that is outside current documentation, outside current explanation, and outside the standard closure criteria for any individual posting. The existence of this file is based on my professional assessment that the pattern is real and the gap is large enough to warrant sustained attention. If I am wrong, this inquiry should be closed and regarded as an overreach. If I am right, it should have been opened sooner. She filed the summary. Then, because she was thorough, she added the contributing sources to the anomaly index and cross-referenced them with the originating posting closures and the deferred closure list. Then she opened the primary source record for the inquiry, which was Yara Haddad's file, and read it start to finish. She read it the way she read everything, slowly, in order, without skipping, with the reading glasses on and the slate held in both hands. 4 reports, 4 years, impeccable form. The technical observations were careful and honest about their uncertainty. The contractor knew she was using improvised equipment and said so, and the improvised equipment was described in enough detail that a qualified engineer could assess it. The Su'ul catalog specialist reference in year 3 was noted with the catalog entry number. The 3 recordings of the slowing reference were documented with timestamps and methodology. And in each report, at the bottom of the optional box, the invitation. She had asked the authority's own machine for something outside its standard parameters, and she had received a technically correct answer that told her exactly how to do what the machine would not. She had used a rule the way it was not intended to be used. She was, in her own careful reckoning, the person in this filing chain who should have been asked first. 4 years of asking. She was the first person in the authority to hear it. She opened a new form. Interview request, infrastructure anomaly, 774 Omega, contractor of record, reach relay ARC9. She wrote, Contractor Haddad, Y, you have filed 4 reports describing anomalous behavior of a relay network component not described in current documentation. Your reports have been classified under infrastructure anomaly 774 Omega and are the primary source record for the inquiry. As the contractor of record for the oldest observations in this file, you are requested to attend an interview at the earliest mutually convenient date. She paused, standard language. She added, This is an official inquiry. You have been asking to be asked officially. I am asking. She stamped the request, filed it under 774 Omega, and transmitted it on the certified channel. The slow, formal, one-way kind of reach traffic that would cross the transit lag and arrive at ARC9 in 2 days as a thing on a screen official and undeniable, in a posting that had spent 4 years filing into silence. There would be no conversation. There would be a notice, and then an interview, in that order, through channels, the way the authority did things. She did not wait by the console for a receipt. While the transmission cleared, she added the final housekeeping entry to the 774 Omega working file, the one she had been composing in her head since the compliance desk conversation, the one that was not standard language and which she was putting in the record anyway. Note for any subsequent officer who opens this file, I did not break a rule. I used one correctly in a way it was not intended to be used. There is a difference, and I will thank you to record it that way if anyone ever asks. The transmission cleared. It would cross the dark for 2 days and arrive in 2 days at a welded one-person can at the near end of Arc 9 on the certified set, where a relay contractor who had asked 4 times to be asked would find it waiting. A notice that an oversight officer, conducting a cost review of Frontier postings, requested the attendance of the contractor of record in connection with an open file classified as an infrastructure anomaly, built on reports that contractor had filed going back years. Renata would not be there to watch her read it. That was all right. The asking did not need her in the room. It needed only to be official, to come in on the channel that carried real reach traffic, the channel that meant somebody upstream had finally read the thing. And it was official, and it was hers, and it was on its way. She would meet the contractor in person soon enough. The Year 4 report was in the file. The reference was still slowing, the interval still increasing, the thing under the network not yet stopped. There would be a great deal to ask in person, officially. But that was the inquiry's work, and the inquiry now existed, and the first ask was already gone into the dark ahead of her. The module was quiet. The overhead light continued its authoritative behavior. Renata sat for a moment in the chair that the authority had shipped to this transit hub in the expectation that it would support a ledger function for 4 weeks and be packed back up and shipped somewhere else. She thought about the things she had done today, which was use a rule correctly in a way its designers had not anticipated in order to force an institution to look at something it would rather not look at, and which had cost her so far the security of knowing her closure sweep was clean and the peace of not having her name on a file that was going to attract exactly the kind of attention she had spent 20 years avoiding. She opened the 774 Omega working file one more time and read the last line she had written. There is a difference, and I will thank you to record it that way if anyone ever asks. She saved the file. Outside the viewport, the Frontier Dark was being the Frontier Dark. The authority's transit hub was being the authority's transit hub. The buoys on Arc 9 were, somewhere very far from here, keeping their count and their inherited beat in the slow thing underneath it that was getting slower, and a relay contractor who had been asking for 4 years to be taken seriously was sitting in her own small dark and knowing for the first time that someone with the institutional standing to act on it had read every word. Renata Solheim closed the 774 Omega file and began packing up the module because she had a flight scheduled and the 12 postings were resolved and she was done here in the technical sense. She was, she suspected, not done in any other sense. But that was what the inquiry was for.